Something you might notice when trying those movements from the last video is, well, you can't. Or at least you can't very confidently. This will be the result of all those years sitting at your desk and not doing anything. So, how do you get back some basic mobility and learn to move properly again? One thing that can help a great deal is to practice stretching, in which case you'll be able to regain your full range of motion. So, how do you go about doing that? According to Pavel Tsatsouline, and I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the vast majority of us go about this the wrong way entirely. If you're used to stretching by forcing yourself into a position until it hurts, then you may actually be doing more harm than good, so stop it right away. How do we know this is a bad move? Well, it can be demonstrated with a simple bit of self-experimentation. Simply lie on the ground on one side of your body, so one arm and one leg are touching the floor beneath you. Now, raise your leg up 90 degrees to point right at the ceiling. It should be fairly easy. Now, roll onto the other side and raise the opposite leg again. Easy, yeah? So, if you can move both legs to 90 degrees, why can't you do the box splits? It's got nothing to do with any tissue connecting your legs either. In fact, there is no tissue other than bone between your legs. No ligaments and no muscle to prevent you from doing the splits. According to Pavel then, what's actually happening is that your brain is forcing you to stop before you reach box splits in order to try and prevent an injury. Again, it comes down to the fact that you don't normally utilize this amount of flexibility, which teaches your brain and your body that it's bad news. More specifically, it comes down to your central nervous system, which is responsible for all the knee-jerk reactions of your musculature that lie outside the domain of your conscious control. It's also your CNS that is responsible for your eye blinking when someone is trying to get an eyelash out of it. Years of training yourself to believe that you can't do box splits and years of moving within a far more limited range of movement have taught your body to lock in place when you try and move outwards. So guess what happens if you try and force yourself into a split? That's right, your body fights back by tensing up your muscles and making it even more difficult. And you further teach your body that it can't go into that position. Instead then, the better technique is to much more gently ease yourself into these positions and then to actively relax your body as much as possible. Move to the point where it just starts to hurt and then relax your body as much as possible. The more you do this, the more you'll remove that knee-jerk reaction and you'll regain your natural flexibility. Note that you shouldn't use this kind of training for your back, so don't use it when touching your toes. We're actually meant to be limited in some of our movements, and if you override this, it can lead to injury. But for movements involving the legs and the arms, this technique can be highly useful, and many people find it helps them to regain their movement in no time at all. For the back, meanwhile, yoga can be an incredible tool for improving your ability to move. In fact, yoga is something that pretty much everyone should do, and if you combine it with the techniques recommended by Pavel and a training program full of compound lifts, you'll be on your way to increased mobility in no time. And don't get this twisted. If you're thinking now that stretching isn't going to make much difference to you or that somehow it's for girls, then you've got another thing coming. If you feel tired and lethargic or if you feel stiff, then you need stretching. Stretching will not only help you to remove pain and discomfort, it will help you to feel far more full of childlike energy than you have done for years. You'll find you're faster and more mobile and more ninja-like in general. Stretching makes us stronger. Studies show that people who stretch regularly are able to lift heavier weights, which probably is because the muscles and ligaments themselves present less resistance when they try to lift. In other words, they're not fighting their own body as well as the weights. But note that you actually shouldn't stretch just prior to a workout. Contrary to popular belief, this actually makes you weaker and more prone to injury by removing some of the tension that keeps your muscles in place and where they should be. Stretch after workouts or as part of a separate program performed on its own. Meanwhile, you should also look into self-myofascial release. Now, this is another health fad that's found its way into the gym that's nevertheless something that you should pay attention to. Self-myofascial release is what you might also know as foam rolling, although you can also use a tennis ball. This basically involves rolling around on something solid that will protrude into the fascia and help to remove knots and fascial adhesions. Now, without getting into too much science here, the fascia is essentially a large piece of tissue that looks like a thin film and that surrounds all of your muscles and joints. It's a bit like, if your muscles have been vacuum packed, and this is what keeps everything in place while at the same time supporting you through movements. The fascia is something that modern science is only just getting around to looking at, but it's thought by many to be as important, if not more important, than the musculature itself. When you contract your muscle, your brain sends impulses through your central nervous system. Once these impulses reach your motor end plates, they release calcium, amongst other things, to tell the fibers to begin contracting. The body needs to remove this calcium over time, but sometimes this doesn't go as smoothly as it should, and the resultant buildup leaves the muscles contracting in single points. This creates a tiny localized bulge of tension that can inhibit movement and create pain. Fascial adhesions, meanwhile, are caused when the fascia is torn or damaged and ends up forming a more rigid, less flexible scar tissue. The fascia doesn't show up on MRI scans, so often this damage goes completely unrecognized, but it causes painful movement and other problems, and it needs to be dealt with. Foam rolling is essentially like giving yourself a sports massage that really gets right into those fascial adhesions and knots in order to work them out and give you back your movement. To do it, you need to get yourself a foam roller or a tennis ball, and then roll your back and other muscles across it. Move it around directly on the muscle until you feel a sudden twinge of pain. It should hurt, but it should feel like a good pain that's somewhat satisfying at the same time. Self-myofascial release can be used right before a workout, and should also have the same benefits for increasing strength during lifts.